This podcast brought to you by Ring. With Ring cameras, you can check on your pets to catch them in the act.
Izzy, drop that.
Or just keep them company.
Aw, I'll be home soon.
Make sure they're okay while you're away. With Ring. Learn more at ring.com/pets.
Welcome back, folks. It's Wednesday, August 7th, 2024. Born on this date in 1941, jazz musician Howard Johnson of Montgomery. In 1966, co-founder of Wikipedia, Jimbo Wales of Huntsville. Today is National Lighthouse Day for all you calendar enthusiasts. Today on the show, we talk with reporter William Thornton about his day at a reunion for the descendants of slaves at a cotton plantation in Etowah County. First, though, let's talk about that passenger rail vote, Hoover coaches on administrative leave, and a new member in the state's Jazz Hall of Fame. My name's Ike Morgan, and we're down in Alabama. Passenger rail service has taken another step toward returning to Mobile for the first time in nearly 20 years. AL.com's John Sharp reports that the Mobile City Council voted in favor of authorizing the final agreements that were needed to restart Amtrak service between Mobile and New Orleans. The route will include stops in Pascagoula, Biloxi, Gulfport, and Bay St. Louis. Now, the deal includes a commitment of a little more than $3 million over 3 years, offset by $1 million from the Alabama State Port Authority and a hoped $4 million from the state. Now, that state money isn't yet in the budget and would still need legislative approval. Southern Rail Commission Chairman Knox Ross said he's hoping that by the end of October, there'll be a groundbreaking for the downtown train depot and a branding announcement on the new train. Now, check out last Thursday's episode of Down in Alabama, where we talked at length with John about the pending return of Amtrak to Mobile. Hoover City Schools announced that Hoover High School football coach Drew Gilmer and defensive coordinator Adam Helms are on administrative leave, reports AL.com's Dennis Victory and Ben Thomas. School officials didn't comment beyond Tuesday's press release, which said there would be a, quote, thorough and impartial review of recent developments. Some video clips were circulating on social media showing activity at a Hoover football practice. Some viewers were interpreting those clips as showing inappropriate behavior by some coaches. After the news of the administrative leave broke, several players took to social media to voice support for the coaches. Gilmer took the job at Hoover after spending 8 years at Clay. There, he won 2 of the past 3 Class 6A titles. Jazz bassist Ron Carter was inducted into the Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame, reports AL.com's Shauna Stewart. Carter is said to be the world's most recorded jazz bassist. During the 1960s, he was a member of Miles Davis's second great quintet, along with Wayne Shorter, Herbie Hancock, and Tony Williams. The Alabama Jazz Hall of Fame Museum is in the Carver Theater in Birmingham. Now, it's been closed for years for renovations, but officially reopened this week. Let's take a quick break. Next up, we'll talk about a reunion at an Alabama cotton plantation.
Thanks for coming back, everybody. Now, if y'all are into history, antebellum history, or old Alabama homes, you need to check out a story by William Thornton over on AL.com. We're going to link to that in the show notes. Right now, we're going to welcome back to the show from the county of Etowah, journalist extraordinaire William Thornton. Good to have you on, Bill.
Good to be here.
Bill, you were in Etowah County over the weekend and got to experience a pretty fascinating view of history.
Yeah, what it was a family reunion that happens every 2 years of the Coates and Thornton families. These are the descendants of people who their ancestors were slaves who worked at a place or lived and worked, were enslaved people at the Coates Mansion, which is in a little town called Coates Bend. It's spelled similarly, but anyway, what it is it's a plantation that was built in the early 1840s by a man named Coates, and he had about 25 slaves that he brought with him from South Carolina, and the people who were gathered for this are the descendants of those enslaved people. Well, this year was different in that the person that owns the old Coates Mansion invited the family reunion to come and see the house and tour it, and she had it all fixed up and everything, and she welcomed them in, and for a lot of them it was the very first time they'd ever been in the place. They drive by it almost every day, but they had never actually seen the inside of it, and for just as a casual observer, it was quite moving.
Yeah, and before we get all into the people there, you talk about this mansion that was actually built by the enslaved people. I'm right?
Yeah, Coates, his family, and the slaves, and some sources say some Cherokee helped to build the house. With the property that he bought had formerly been Cherokee land, and this happened. He bought the land 1 year before the Trail of Tears began. So there's enough to suspect that he came to Alabama because there was cheap land that he could buy at a good price and in bulk. And so once he had the land, he began building this 2-story house. And the interesting thing about it is it's constructed in a way it does not have any nails to hold it together. Somebody who had been out there before, who was the fire chief in those parts, he told me that a few years ago a tree fell on the house and barely put a dent in it. That's how sturdy the thing is still to this day.
Yeah, that's where I was going with that they used wooden pegs to connect all the boards. I mean, this was some pretty big time craftsmanship here just to build this thing.
It's a pretty impressive house. It doesn't look kind of like what you would imagine your classic white column plantation house might look like. It's not brick. It doesn't have the Greek columns and everything, but it's if you come over the bridge into Coates Bend, coming over the Coosa River, it's the first thing you see. It just pops right out of there, and it dominates the landscape.
And this is also cotton country here, right?
Yeah, they plant cotton there, the corn. There's some other crops and everything, but most of the time, if you're in the fall driving past that house, you're going to see rows of cotton around it.
Yeah, one of my favorite people you talked to in your story was a fellow who remembers picking cotton when he was too little to go to school, and that's a long time ago. Fewer and fewer people can say that. Bishop
Coates, if you've ever actually tried to pick a ball of cotton, the first thing that you'll notice is the burrs on it, and if you can imagine someone spending day after day in the hot, sweating, trying to pick those things, and just the idea of a 5-year-old kid trying to pick cotton, just staggers you. But he was talking about the fact that, used to be you could earn some money off of that. He said, but after the pickers came along, it was harder and harder to get people to justify going out there for what they were paying.
Yeah. Now, at this reunion, would you say that it's more local attendees, or did you see a lot of out-of-town folks, coming into Alabama searching for their roots?
Well, it was a pretty good mixture. Most of the people there live in and around there, but one person in particular that kind of got the ball rolling on this visit to the plantation house was a man by the name of Antonius Colts. He's a Christian rapper out of Atlanta, and he has been researching his family, and he started on this after he did one of those genealogy DNA tests. And the more he found out, the more he realized that his family kind of originated from this part of the world. So he wanted to know more about it, which led him to contacting the lady who actually owns the house now. Her name is Lee Posey. And once he got in touch with her, she told him about the reunion, and he was like, well, I've got to go. And once those two connected, then I think that was kind of the impetus for her to invite the reunion to come to the house.
Yeah, that's really an awesome step to get folks in there. Can you describe a little bit about what you see inside the house? I know they've had to make room for indoor plumbing at some point over the years, but
yes, they did. Well, you've got these 20 by 20 rooms with 12-foot ceilings. So obviously lots of doors, lots of windows, because it would have had to have been with Alabama's climate before air conditioning.
God bless it.
But it's been updated. There's air conditioning. There is indoor plumbing. Kitchen is pretty modern. It's been updated several times since it was built. Most of the rooms, though, are very large, very roomy. There's, I think, maybe 5 bedrooms, and some other rooms were used for a library and just a living room or whatever. The owner said on Sunday that whoever has owned the house over the years has found different uses for different rooms. At one point, there were several families living in the house that were using one room for whatever, their main stuff. And it's big enough to, you could accommodate, several different families. But when you walk through there, I couldn't help but, I think everybody who had the experience of walking through that house, you couldn't help but picture what it would have been like back then after it was built, to have that much space. You got to fill it. What did the furniture look like? How hot it would have been. There's so many things that your mind kind of begins to imagine just the longer you stay there.
Yeah, it amazes me that they built homes as big and inefficient in so many ways as some of them did. I guess, you're talking about the upper class, and you got to show it, right?
Yeah, some of it is prestige, but we have a lot of misconceptions about the period before the Civil War. A lot of it is gone with the wind, and this idea that you had this kind of idle rich class who had hundreds of slaves working, and that was the case in some parts of the world. But just checking into this, for example, Mr. Coates, who built the house, he had about 25 slaves. He was in there working with them because he had enough land that he couldn't just turn it over to somebody else. So, and building the house and doing the chores around the farm to get things going. So a big house like that is more of a sign of prestige, something to brag about. It's the focus of everything in the area. You entertain there, you welcome visitors, you're kind of like an all-purpose hotel for somebody passing through. But also it's a way for you to announce that you've, quote, arrived, I guess.
There's a little bit of irony, I guess, in that the road comes so close to the Coates Thornton house. That's kind of because you think of these huge green lawns, and you pretty much drive right out the front door.
Mm-hmm. And it would have been something like that at the time, because it was, there was you're so close to the river, and you are kind of the nexus point for everything in the area because of the size of your farm and all the other farms in proximity. So when you look at it that way, you kind of gives you the barest idea of what it must have been like back then.
And it's a good thing they get their chance to kind of come back and see their history, because you can, your personal history doesn't begin in 1865 like so many have had to do.
Exactly. So when we were standing out there in the heat and everything, just talking, Mr. Colts, when he was talking to some of his cousins, and they were talking about how life must have been. It is unfathomable to us to imagine what it was to be somebody else's property. You're not looking for a better job. You can't. You're there, and you've really got only just a few choices. You can stay there and put up with it, or you can run, or you risk death. And Mr. Colts in particular, when he was talking, he said, I don't know if I have inside of me what it would take to endure something like that. I think anybody who even thinks about it for more than two minutes or so comes away with the same questions of what would I do in that situation? How would I respond? Would I fold? Would I fight? Would I somehow make it, in spite of all the hardship and everything? And it's something that I don't think any of us can really truly comprehend.
Yeah, well said. The current owner, her family bought it a couple of decades after the Civil War and has sort of had it at moments throughout history. Do I understand that right?
Yeah, it's passed through several hands. Just as a personal note, my name is Thornton. I am distantly related to the people who own the house. I had actually been to the house once before when I was 10 years old, and it was vacant, and they were trying to sell it. And they had, done work to it and everything. But, when you think about if you were trying to buy a house like that, your questions of upkeep, how are you going to furnish it? How are you going to keep it steady and everything? You can imagine how inefficient a house like that would be if you didn't have the money to keep it going. So, it's passed through a lot of hands over the years.
Now, does that make you Southern aristocracy?
If you doubt that, I'll show you my bank account. We can sell it real quickly.
That's for the people who live up on top of the hill.
One thing I think that needs to be remembered too is that we were talking about slavery a minute ago, and one aspect of slavery that really doesn't get talked about a lot is it's not all that efficient as an economic.
Absolutely.
System. You think that you're not paying somebody, but the thing is you are paying for them. You're paying for their room and their board and their food. And if you don't feed them well and you don't care for them well, they don't want to work. And there's no incentive, not to mention the fact it's a degrading experience on them emotionally, physically, spiritually, and it rubs off on you because you get a sense of that when you walk through a house like that and you think to yourself how much work is involved in keeping it all going. And I think that was one thing that, was mentioned on Sunday just from the people at the reunion when they were going through there, just to appreciate all that it took just to keep life going, not just the business of a farm, but to keep yourself going. How am I going to make it through the day? And you see it in really small places, and it just kind of stays in your memory.
Bill, are we leaving anything out? Anything else you want to add? I don't want to keep you all day here.
So one thing that was funny about it is that when people began arriving, they would want to see the rooms and everything. But what was interesting was the older people who, needed a cane or whatever, they still wanted to go upstairs, which was not an easy ask because they were really steep stairs and everything. And there's not really something to lean on, but so many of the people who were there wanted to go in and see every part of the house because, it's been such a part of their lives, and yet they hadn't been inside of it. So there was one man in particular, I wrote about him. He was 82 years old, and he came down the steps after seeing it, and he's like, I made it.
Oh man, that's awesome.
And it was interesting to see because you could tell that he appreciated the fact that he did it, and he was never going to do it again because it hurt his knees so much, but yet he was determined to do it. And I think for a lot of the people who were there, they were looking forward to it. They had a lot of curiosity about the house, what it looked like, and they wanted just for a brief moment to be able to see something that is part of their history. And, as one man said, it's bittersweet, but it's still something that goes into who they are. So, and I think that kind of spoke for a lot of people who were there.
Yeah, their names may not be on the deed, but they certainly have a stake in the space and its history.
I did not say that. I didn't mention this, by the way. I didn't mention this in the story, but some of the members of the reunion are talking about trying to buy the house.
Oh,
now.
really?
They are. They're talking it over how they would use it or what they would do and everything. But they are, that ball is kind of rolling. No offer has been made, but there's definitely discussion going on.
I'm so glad you wrote the story, and that I'm glad the folks from the Coates families were able to connect with their past like they did. Thanks so much, Bill, for joining us. You come back, won't you?
I will. Take care.
Thanks, everybody, for listening. We're going to be back again tomorrow. Until then, come by and see us on the internet at al.com.